Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating 70-year economic relationship between the United States and Pakistan. And this isn't just a history lesson. It's a real-time case study that helps us understand exactly how global power dynamics shift and how a nation can literally transition its entire economic identity on the world stage.
To make sense of all this, here is our game plan. We'll be covering 1. The dependency theory lens. 2. Decades of transactional aid. 3. The cost of dependency. 4. Rise to semi-periphery status. 5. Trade over foreign aid. And finally, 6. Building a multipolar future.
Section 1. The dependency theory lens. Framing the global economy.
We're kicking things off by looking through a very specific academic lens. Back in the 1950s, an economist named Raoul Prebisch formulated something called dependency theory, and it suggests something pretty profound. It argues that the economic structures of poor developing countries are actually shaped and, frankly, conditioned by the interests of richer, dominant nations. So underdevelopment isn't just a local failure. It's often a byproduct of the international system itself.
Think of the world as being split into two main camps. On one side, you have the powerful core states. These are the wealthy, economically diverse nations. They're the ones manufacturing finished products and providing international loans. Then, on the other side, you have periphery states. These nations are usually forced to export raw materials to the core while remaining super dependent on foreign aid and outside investments just to keep their heads above water.
The sociologist Andre Gunder Frank actually compared this setup to a giant solar system. He said the powerful metropolis, or core state, acts like a sun, using its immense economic gravity to pull in and sometimes exploit the smaller satellite nations in its orbit. So the wealth just naturally flows toward the center, which traps the periphery in a constant state of dependence.
Section 2. Decades of transactional aid, a tumultuous timeline.
Let's apply this to the US and Pakistan. Talk about a roller coaster of a timeline. It's been incredibly transactional. In the 1950s, Pakistan relied on the US for security through alliances like SEATO and CENTO, but by 1965, the US slapped on major sanctions. Then in 1998, following nuclear tests, we see heavy economic sanctions return. But then, abruptly in 2001, massive aid just suddenly resumes for the war on terror. It's this dizzying cycle of military necessity, heavy sanctions, and sudden cash influxes based entirely on shifting geopolitical interests.
Section 3. The cost of dependency, the price of foreign aid.
So you might be wondering, what actually happens when a periphery state relies on a core state for decades? Well, Pakistan has received roughly $70 billion in total U.S. foreign aid since its independence. And sure, that sounds great on paper, but it created a deep, systemic reliance on American subsidies. It tied Pakistan's economic stability right to Washington's strategic goals.
But here's the catch, and it is a huge one. Since joining the US-led war on terror, the direct and indirect economic cost incurred by Pakistan due to terrorism hit a staggering $123.13 billion. The aid was substantial, for sure, but the economic toll on the domestic front was absolutely devastating across all major sectors of the economy. And that brings us to the crucial point here. That massive influx of foreign aid wasn't just free money. It gave the United States a way to monopolize regional politics and heavily regulate Pakistan's internal national policies. Through the lens of dependency theory, this is exactly how a core state regulates the socio-political and economic interests of the dependent state. It essentially strips away some of that country's independent voice on the world stage.
Section 4. Rise to semi-periphery status, a shift in power. Fast forward to the modern era, and our historical case study takes a major plot twist. Pakistan starts breaking out of that periphery box. This geopolitical friction became hyper-visible on January 1, 2018, when U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted this exact quote, pointing out past financial aid while accusing Pakistan of deceit. It marked a profound diplomatic crossroads, a very public rupturing of that old core periphery dynamic.
And wow, did the data back up that political rhetoric? U.S. aid to Pakistan completely plummeted. It had peaked in 2010 at around $4.5 billion, but by 2016 it dropped to $1.1 billion, and then sharply down to just $526 million in 2017. We're talking massive cuts across the board, from foreign military funding to coalition support funds. The era of unconditional dependency was effectively over.
Now, based on dependency theory, you'd probably think losing that core support would cause a total economic collapse, right?
Actually, no. Incredibly, Pakistan's GDP grew from roughly $74 billion back in 2000 to over $312 billion in 2018. The economy showed amazing resilience and kept moving upward, completely defying that massive reduction in U.S. financial help.
This kind of resilience signals Pakistan's upgrade to what sociologist Emmanuel Wallerstein calls a semi-periphery state. These are the nations sitting right in the middle. They're more powerful than a periphery state, but maybe not quite a core state yet. The key here is that they can develop their own industries and flexibly maneuver within the global capitalist economy. They're no longer totally beholden to a single superpower, which changes the entire playing field.
Section 5. Trade over foreign aid, the new economic reality.
So, what does it look like when trade actually overtakes foreign aid? Well, check out these numbers from 2018. Pakistan was importing American agricultural and industrial goods, like $694 million in soybeans and $211 million in machinery. But look at the flip side. Pakistan exported billions in finished products back to the U.S., including $1.3 billion in miscellaneous textiles and nearly $1.4 billion in knit and woven apparel.
Get this. The United States is actually Pakistan's largest export market. Total two-way goods trade between the nations hit a whopping $6.6 billion in 2018. And here's the kicker. Pakistan actually held a $783 million trade surplus over the U.S. That is a monumental shift from the days of relying on aid handouts. Today, the relationship is anchored by billions in mutual trade.
Section 6. Building a multipolar future. New alliances. With USA dropping and trade stepping up to the plate, Pakistan is really leaning into a multipolar foreign policy. Instead of just looking west, they're engaging in massive pilot projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. These are huge infrastructure investments bringing in advanced tech and projecting hundreds of thousands of new jobs. It just goes to show Pakistan is leveraging its semi-periphery status to attract diverse global investments. They aren't strictly reliant on Western capital anymore.
We are literally watching a real-time shift here. The past was defined by a unipolar reliance on U.S. aid, which left the country super vulnerable to sudden sanctions. But the future? That's about multipolar strategic alignment. It's about diversifying trade, deepening ties with China, exploring rapprochement with Russia, and welcoming new global investments.
It's such a fascinating evolution. As developing nations successfully transition from aid dependency to trade surpluses and forge these robust, diverse new alliances, we have to ask ourselves, in a truly multipolar world where economic power is decentralized, will the age-old dynamic of core and periphery eventually disappear entirely? That is definitely something to think about as the global economy continues to evolve. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.